Rochelle, you want money in the box?
Yes, for donations, if you're able to. Thank you so much.
That's a nice one. Leave her alone. I don't need a lot of money here.
Hey, anything helps.
Guilt trip me. Here you go.
Oh, thank you so much.
Take my money.
Thank you.
Really?
Yeah.
Nobody's done it.
This one. That's right. Okay, yeah, I will.
It's like natural. I don't know why. It was doable. It's cramped.
Yeah, doable.
I was like, two of us over there, like 6 foot long. So, 1-4. Yeah, you're in 1-3 area? Yeah, I'm past, it's just doing that public. Lot 4 right by the bridge. Like that. It's close to the bridge you can get.
I was so busy, and I was on like 11:51. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank God. We're all right there.
That wasn't by design. Like I started doing that like before I read the thing, like I read the directions, and then I realized like it was like 10.
I read it to Joe when I did.
I guess our guys.
I wasn't allowed to go up there. That's what it is. 4,000. Well, I emailed them. I was like, hey, let me in the context in this.
30-second countdown, and then we'll have Chris.
Thanks, everybody. We're just recording this on live stream and YouTube. It's going out to national members of the Society of Professional Journalists as well as the National Center for Disability and Journalism at Arizona State University. So we're just beware, you're on candid camera. We're going to try to have opportunities for all of you to ask questions. And then I'm going to be monitoring the live stream here to see if anyone chats. If you do have questions but you're too shy to ask, you can also look at our YouTube link and just search for Allison and Lucas, and you'll be able to see that. But we're going to kick it off in a few more seconds. Over here with our guest speaker, Chris Vaccaro, from the Society of Professional Journalists. I think it would just be just for you guys in the back, I see that our audio is live, but our video is not yet.
All right, how's everybody doing? Thanks for joining us both here at William Paterson and online on social media. Really special event here today, and I'm privileged and grateful to speak on behalf of the Society of Professional Journalists. I'm Chris Vaccaro. I'm the National At-Large Director of the Society. I'm also a professor at Hofstra University and very involved with sports media on a number of different levels. So, and also really proud to call Dr. Hirshon a friend and a colleague and speak not just about this event and the fact that we get to be on this incredibly progressive campus that's got a really growing and important communication program, but also about the chapter of Society of Professional Journalists here at William Paterson, which recently was announced as National Chapter of the Year by SPJ. So a round of applause for all the efforts that are going on here. And listen, it's the students that run it. It's the students that make it lively. It's the students that have put William Paterson on the map from a journalistic perspective now twice. It happened in 2020 and it happened in this past year. So we're looking for, 3-time champions at some point. But Dr. Hirshon doesn't take credit for it, so I can give him credit for it. As a really passionate professor and educational leader here who cares deeply about SPJ, about journalism, and about all the research areas that he gets to study. He's the driver of it from a faculty perspective. So you're lucky to have Dr. Hirshon. You're lucky that he cares so much about your growth as students, all, again, in the eyes of SPJ and journalism. So also give a round of applause for Dr. Hirshon and all the great work that he's doing. And honestly, this event is a product of that, right? This event is students coming together to have ideas that create opportunity for other students. It's Dr. Hirshon driving it. It's the attendees making sure that you can be here during your busy Monday. And of course, obviously, the internet for all the people tuning in. Hopefully there's thousands. I don't know. If not, we'll get them after the fact. It's people like Allison who get to come here and talk about incredible stories, obviously in the case of her husband and things that she's experienced as well. So you're going to hear about that. And I'm not going to take away from Andrew's introduction about that very briefly. But these are special moments. These are the types of opportunities that students should get at communication and journalism programs at any university. But William Paterson is a leader in SPJ, in journalism education, in opportunity for student growth through storytelling. So I'm just happy to be here representing SPJ and looking forward to hearing from Allison about her husband and all the great stories that she has to tell. I'm also excited now to bring up Andrew Herbst, the secretary of the student chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists here at William Paterson. So hopefully you enjoy the chat. Hopefully you'll obviously enjoy hearing from Andrew. And thanks again for the opportunity to be on your beautiful campus.
Thank you, Mr. Vaccaro. We are very grateful that you made the long drive from Long Island to be with us today. Thank you for all you've done to support chapters as regional director of the past 2 years, and congrats on your new position on the SPJ National Board. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Herbst, and I'm the secretary for the William Paterson Society of Professional Journalists, also known as WPSPJ. Thank you for joining us today. We are proud that SPJ named this its National Campus Chapter of the Year last month, beating more than 100 journalism programs across the United States. Today's event is part of a busy month for WPSPJ. A few weeks ago, we set up a booth at the Autumn Lights Festival in West Milford to promote SPJ, and we toured newsrooms at both News 12 New Jersey and CBS News. Last week we shadowed a theater critic as she attended the world premiere of a play. And this Friday, we're going to Philadelphia to tour WHYY Radio and the Philadelphia Inquirer. Donations to the WPSPJ chapter are always welcome and appreciated. They support the efforts that the chapter puts in to having newsroom tours, provide items that give away at campus recruiting events and to members, and also help the chapter provide transportation options for students that attend trips. I hope that all the students in attendance today consider joining WPSPJ. You do not need to be a journalism major to be a WPSPJ member. You just have to be interested in learning about the critical role that journalism plays in our society today. Please take out your phones right now and follow us on Instagram with the handle @WPSPJ. You can also approach me after today's event to discuss how you can become a member. Which now brings us to today's event. We are about to watch a short film named The Visionary. It tells us the story of the late Ed Lucas, a blind reporter who covered the New York sports scene for decades. I asked Dr. Hirshon about holding today's event with Mr. Lucas's wife, Allison Lucas. My family is very familiar with the foundation that Allison runs. The Ed Lucas Foundation works with many charities to help those who are facing obstacles. Their mission is especially meaningful to me since my brother Eric and I were born 15 weeks prematurely almost 30 years ago. We each weighed 1 pound and 11 ounces at birth, and were in the NICU for the first 3.5 months of our lives. We both have cerebral palsy, and Eric uses a wheelchair. Eric and I both have overcome many challenges in our lives resulting from our premature birth, just like Ed Lucas had to due to his blindness. In fact, I was told that I would never be able to attend college, but here I am today, the secretary of a nationally recognized student organization. And after this semester, I'll just be 9 credits away from graduating. Thank you, everyone. I am so grateful to all the people who helped me and my brother overcome obstacles in our lives. That is why it is meaningful to me to have Mrs. Lucas come to speak with us today, and why I'm so glad you're with us this afternoon to hear her message. I would now like to introduce the advisor of the William Paterson Society of Personal Journalists, Dr. Nick Hirshon.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for that great introduction. Andrew's story is so powerful, so every time I hear it, I think this is why I encourage all of you to be, I have mic'd up, so yeah. So we're very grateful to have everybody as part of the Society of Professional Journalists, and thank you, Andrew, for proposing this great event today. So we're joined today by very patient, because she's been waiting as we've been going through all of this, Mrs. Allison Lucas, and thank you, first of all, so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful. I know you had quite a journey to get here. It took a while. But the story that you're going to tell, because I know from speaking with you and seeing what you have talked about your husband in the past, is another very powerful one that I think is going to affect a lot of the people who are listening here today in person on our live stream. So I know that a lot of the folks in attendance here may not know a lot about Ed Lucas. I want to give them an opportunity to learn a little bit more before we get too far into our conversation. So we're about to play a documentary 9 minutes long about Ed that was called The Visionary, that aired on ESPN. So you'll all be able to watch that, get a little bit of information, and then later on we'll have opportunities for you either on YouTube or face-to-face to ask some questions. I'll be leading a conversation, but I want all you to think of questions that you might have too as you watch this and learn about Ed's life and the adversity that he overcame. So when we have a chance, we'll get that queued up on the screen behind us and we'll watch The Visionary.
October 3rd, 1951, the New York Giants faced the Brooklyn Dodgers for the National League pennant. Bobby Thompson gave us the moment, the home run to beat the Dodgers, known only as the shot heard around the world.
For one 12-year-old fan, this day truly changed his life. Chris Connolly has this week's SC Featured, presented by Microsoft.
This is SC Featured. This is the power of sports.
The afternoon of October 3rd, 1951. Drama at the Polo Grounds in New York, with the Dodgers and Giants playing one epic game for the National League title. As fans around the area watched on TV, a 12-year-old in Jersey City saw that his father was holding a rosary, trying to pray his Giants to victory.
I wish for the amazing new iPhone 15 Pro. Sean.
Do you mean this one, the one with titanium? Switch to Verizon. You can trade in any iPhone and get the new iPhone 15 Pro on them.
It's your last chance to trade in any iPhone for a new iPhone 15 Pro on us, only on Verizon.
Growing up in Jersey City in the late 40s and 50s, Ed Lucas lived for baseball. Watching Bobby Thompson's shot heard round the world with his father was the pinnacle of his life as a fan. Minutes later, it was still light outside, enough for Ed to play the game he loved.
So I grabbed my baseball glove, got a couple of guys together. We played in the skating rink, which was a blacktop. We painted bases.
In all the excitement, 12-year-old Ed would get to pitch. He took off his thick glasses and placed them in his back pocket.
I was a left-handed pitcher. And I threw a ball, and the line drive came back. And that was the last thing I ever saw.
Both retinas had detached. Nothing could be done. Ed Lucas was blind.
But I still wanted to do something in baseball. I loved the game.
Ed's mother wrote to major league teams and players on behalf of her despondent son, and they responded. One day, Ed was introduced to one of his heroes, Yankee shortstop Phil Rizzuto.
He came over and said, "Hey, I understand you're a big baseball fan." I said, "Yes." And he said, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you something. This is my phone number. So you call the old scooter anytime you want to talk." He said, "I'll always be there for you."
The scooter was as good as his word. For 50 years, Rizzuto was Ed Lucas's mentor, friend, confidant, frequent chauffeur, and unflagging supporter.
You take the same picture all the time.
Okay.
You got to do a different one. I'll put the left hand up. You got the right one.
If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. He made sure that I was going to do things and told me never listen to the naysayers. You do what you want to do.
What Ed wanted to do was interview the players. Rizzuto brought him to Yankee Stadium and got the ball rolling by being his first interview subject.
We have with us now, known to all baseball fans as a Scooter, Phil Rizzuto. How are you, Phil?
Eddie, it's good to see you. We talk to each other on the phone a lot, but I don't get to see you as much as I'd like to.
Well, the same here, Phil, and I'd like to talk to you about a few things.
With the help of his friend Scooter and a seeing eye dog named Kay, the doors opened for Ed to go to college and chase his dream of covering baseball. He would become a staple at Yankee games.
Good evening, baseball fans. We are very honored this evening to have with us the greatest ball player in baseball today and since 1951, Mickey Mantle. Now, we know that you hit over 500 home runs. Are there any goals left?
Well, I've always said that before I quit, I would like to hit 600 home runs.
It's not like a guy you see once or twice here or there. But Ed was there all the time, and it was year in, year out. You just see a commitment and a love for the game.
Just to be able to get the stories he gets, guys always take the time to, make sure they talk to him.
I remember him interviewing me and just knowing every little detail about my career. And I was like, things that I didn't even know. I was like, what? That is incredible.
Yet Ed says he had to face adversity from some fellow journalists.
I called it an Irish whisper. That they would stand around by the clubhouse where I was talking to some of the players and say, "What's this blind guy doing? What's he know about the game? How can he talk about the game when he can't see it?"
He'd be down the other end of the press box, and he's looking out on the field just like everybody else is looking out on the field. I'm watching this and I'm saying, this is unbelievable, because he can't see what's going on out there, but he gets it.
Ed would follow along on the radio with a guide adding details. Ball players noted that Ed seemed to have a few unearthly skills of his own.
Bobby Bonds one day, we're at batting practice. He said, "Listen, when the ball is hit, tell us where it's hit." Oh, I said, ground ball to short, fly ball to right, ground ball to first.
You got all those right?
Yes. The sound of the bat hitting the ball, something special to me.
The only way that he knows what happened is to hear it. So he's trying to paint this picture in his head of what he thinks is going on based off of a memory that he's had a long time ago. I mean, it'd be amazing to see what it is, but somehow he's been able to picture a beautiful story, an exciting game that's kept him coming back.
He began his career in baseball by talking to players he admired. Before long, they were the ones who were admiring him. As his son Chris learned when he met Mickey Mantle at age 8.
I said, "Mr. Mantle, oh, you're my hero," and all that, and he was brushing me off. And I said, my dad is Ed Lucas. And he stopped in his tracks, came back to me, knelt down. I said, son, people tell me every day that I'm their hero. Your dad, he's my hero.
Every day that man wakes up and he faces the same challenges with no sight. And yet he comes in the clubhouse, he's laughing. If he can do that and still maintain a smile on his face, then the problems that I'm gonna face, they can't be major.
This opening day at Yankee Stadium will be my 63rd consecutive home opener.
That would make it 63 home openers and one unforgettable moment when he and his bride Allison became the first couple ever to get married at home plate in Yankee Stadium. The two had been introduced thanks to Phil Rizzuto.
Phil Rizzuto asked my dad, what gets you through these dark moments? My father replied, it was his family, it was his faith, but baseball was the most powerful thing.
Well, Eddie Lucas, you've done a great job. You've come so far. I want to congratulate you on your advancement and
Well, thank you very, very much.
continued success.
Thank you.
How about Phil Rizzuto? My goodness.
So fantastic.
Through the Ed Lucas Foundation for the Blind, Ed and his wife, Allison, make a yearly donation to the Seeing Eye, a nonprofit that breeds and trains seeing eye dogs.
Yeah, and then in December of 2017, a chocolate lab puppy was born into that program. Ed and Allison were given the honor of choosing that puppy's name. Got any guesses? Scooter.
Love it.
That's great. So first off, we just saw the video of you. I'm sure that was emotional to watch that. We just saw the video of you at home plate getting married the first time. So what does that bring back to you when you see that?
Well, interesting thing about that day is it was a beautiful day. It was March 1st, 2006, and the weather was 75 degrees. And Mr. Steinbrenner was absolutely wonderful to us. Mr. Steinbrenner considered Ed part of the family, part of his family. And what he did was he had the field set up like it was opening day. He had the bases down, and he had the red, white, and blue bunting all around, and the chalk lines put down. And then he had up on the scoreboard, it says, the New York Yankees congratulate Ed and Allison on their special day. And it's something that I'll always cherish, and that Ed and I cherish together.
And I know this is very important for you because you're still running the Lucas Foundation. We're going to talk about that today, and the Seeing Eye Dogs. And so when you first met Ed, if we can get there, like what drew you to him? What was it about his story, his personality that made you two fall in love?
Well, actually, I met Scooter before I met Ed. My aunt worked at a local florist in town, and Mr. Rizzuto always liked to support local businesses. And one day he came into the flower shop, and he was talking to my aunt, and he said to her, what's the matter, Marlene? You don't seem like your old self today. And she said to him, well, my niece is experiencing some visual problems. She's legally blind, and we're afraid that she's going to lose all of her sight. And he says, oh, well, I have a friend, and that's how we met.
And when you got together with him, what was it about? Because a lot of the folks in this video we just watched were describing how Ed is every day facing a challenge that a lot of us can't imagine. So it seemed like he was still facing it with a lot of optimism. I know that there were some down points, some adversity that we're going to get into, but what was it about his personality, his presence that drew you?
Well, Ed and I talked on the phone for about 5 years before we met.
Okay.
And Ed always used to say, well, the state of New Jersey wouldn't give him a driver's license, and they certainly wouldn't give me a driver's license. So we had to use the telephone as our form of communication. So we both had a tremendous love for baseball. And I firmly believe that when Ed met me, he met his baseball match. That was our first common bond. In addition to the visual difficulties, experiencing the same things. So we did have those commonalities.
And so I know a lot of students who I've spoken to about this film, about Ed's story, were asking, well, this traumatic moment happened in Ed's life on what was one of the greatest days, I guess, originally in his life, because he sees the Giants win the pennant. And then he gets hit with the baseball and loses his sight. And yet he, you would think maybe someone would say, I don't want to do anything with baseball ever again because it played this role. But he clearly still had this passion for it that lasted many decades. So when you were getting to know him, what did that moment mean to him?
Well, Ed always said, Ed had the philosophy that, and this is his quote now, baseball took my sight, but it also gave me my life. He always knew that he wanted to do something in baseball, and with the help of his parents and friends like Phil Rizzuto, encouraging him, he was able to do that.
Yeah, that's wonderful that he had that kind of an outlook, and we saw it inspired a lot of the people who he interacted with. So I know the video mentioned, and you and I have talked about some of the adversity that he did face. Not everybody was always kind to him. He was talking there about the Irish whisper that he was hearing in the press box, and certain reporters saying, who's this blind guy covering baseball? Why is he looking out onto the field? He can't see anything. And I'm sure there were some players who had some of those things. We didn't see that as much in the documentary, but I know you mentioned to me that there were some issues with players. So can you speak a little bit, what kind of adversity did Ed face?
Well, when Ed first started covering baseball, he was 18 years old. And there was a very famous shot in that documentary with Ed and Willie Mays. And Ed considers that his first big interview. He was 18 years old when he did that, and it was the last day of the Polo Grounds. And Ed was granted the opportunity to speak to Willie Mays, who he considered the greatest baseball player of his time, of his era.
And I think we have that photo, so we can put it up as you're continuing to tell our story, but yes.
Yes. So the way Ed covered baseball, he had to have a guide with him, and the guide would carry a large Pentron tape recorder. It weighed about, I believe Ed said it weighed about 10 to 12 pounds. It was very, very bulky, not the little devices that we have now.
Sure.
So he was granted the opportunity to speak to Mays in the dugout at age 18 before the game. And as he's talking to Willie, Ed could hear back and forth, people walking back and forth on the wooden slats in the dugout. And Ed recognized the voices. It was the voices of the Associated Press photographers and the UPI photographers. And again, Ed had a keen sense of hearing because, as you well know, if you lose one sense, your other senses become more heightened. And Ed could hear them saying, hey, what's this kid doing taking up all of May's time? I got to meet a deadline. I got to get this photo in, to the paper. And Ed said to himself, well, I'm going to milk this for all it's worth because I may never have the opportunity to speak to Mays again. And he did. But from that day, Ed and Willie became lifelong friends.
And we cycled earlier through, in the documentary, they were cycling through so many photographs of Ed with different players. So you mentioned, obviously, Phil Rizzuto being the most obvious as a broadcaster and connecting the two of you. Willie Mays, we saw Mickey Mantle, and Mickey Mantle being very kind to your son, and then Aaron Judge and all of these different folks. And we're going to put some of these photos up on the screen. So what stands out to you about, I know that there were, again, some players who were not as kind, some of the sports writers weren't, but for those, as we now just saw, him with Aaron Judge, what stands out to you about the relationships that he had with some of the players that went well?
Well, if you'd like, I could talk to you about the adversities that he faced with many of his colleagues first and the players. Again, as I said, Ed broke into journalism in the late 50s, early 60s. And at that point, there were no ADA laws protecting Ed. So he had to literally fend for himself. And he had to get his foot in the door. And there were many years where he went not getting paid, just going to cover games, working on interviews, being what was a stringer. And a stringer is the term that old-time reporters used when they weren't working for a paper or a radio program full-time. It could have been like a small radio station.
Sure.
So they were called stringers. So he was doing that, not being paid, but just doing it to get his foot in the door. And many of the colleagues, again, used to say in the background, "Hey, how can this guy cover it? Again, he's taken up space in the press box, etc. He can't see the game." But they didn't know that Ed did have some sight until he was 12 years old. So he did have perspective of the game. He understood the game better than they did. And the Yankees, really, Mr. Steinbrenner went out of his way in the early 1970s to open up the doors for Ed and treat him as an equal, even though it was difficult for the print media or the broadcast media to accept him. And gradually, Ed earned their trust, as well as the trust of the baseball players. And if you earn a baseball player's trust, they consider you part of the gang. And baseball players are known for their pranks. Sparky Lyle always used to give Ed a hot foot.
What's that?
A hot foot is where he used to light a match from a cigarette, and he used to put it underneath Ed's shoe.
Okay.
And as the match wore down, Ed could feel it burning. And then Billy Martin, who had a very caustic relationship with the press. They either loved him or they hated him, or there were many, many battles between Billy Martin and the press. Billy loved Ed, and every time Ed walked into the locker room or into Billy's office, Billy would always plant a kiss on Ed's cheek. But then again, he used to play pranks on him. There were many times after a game was over, somebody would take Ed by the arm and walk him through the showers, fully dressed. And it was Billy. Ed knew it was Billy because Ed recognized his giggle.
So, you're telling the story as an example of them accepting him into the community, the fraternity.
Yes.
Although we're getting some gasps from the audience of, that doesn't sound very nice to walk a blind man through the shower and to put a match in his shoe. So how did he took that, though, as more of a, like, I'm part of the gang now?
Ed had a very self-deprecating sense of humor. Like I said, there was one day when Ed was asked to be keynote speaker at Yankee Stadium it was Phil Rizzuto Day, in front of 55,000 people. So Ed got up, he made his little speech, and then somebody asked him afterwards, "Ed, how did it feel to speak in front of 55,000 people?" And Ed said, "Didn't bother me one bit. I never saw them."
So that was his attitude about
that
a
was
lot
his
of things.
attitude. And then one day he was speaking to the commissioner of baseball, Commissioner Bowie Kuhn. He says, "Commissioner, I'd like to apply for a job in MLB." And the commissioner said to him, "Well, what do you think you're qualified for, Ed?" And Ed says, "I'm sure I could be an MLB umpire."
I thought I saw that coming. So, you'd also talk, though, about the adversity that he faced and some people who didn't accept him as much, whether it was the writers or the players. I know when we spoke before this event, you had mentioned some of his access to events and some maybe sports writers wanting to limit that access.
Yes, that's correct. in the early 1970s, Ed covered both the Yankees and the Mets, but he was primarily known for covering the Yankees. But he did cover the Mets also. There's a very well-known journalist, and I will not mention names, because a good reporter or a good journalist does not give up their sources. Actually had Ed's National League press pass revoked because he felt that Ed could not cover baseball. But Ed, being the very resourceful man that he was, had a few tricks up his sleeve. Ed was a very proud Irishman, and he was very gregarious, very, very charming, etc. And when the New York Giants were still in town, Ed kind of like became their, what would you call?
Like a traveling secretary?
Yeah, well, traveling secretary, but more of like their good luck charm.
Oh, okay.
I guess you call. So he called up Chub Feeney, who was the former owner of the New York Giants, later becoming National League commissioner, and told him what had happened, that the Mets had revoked his press pass based upon what this journalist had said. Well, Commissioner Feeney would hear none of it, and he gave Ed a lifelong pass to cover National League Baseball in any park.
Isn't that a terrific story? So that he said, well, I'm going to make sure this never happens again.
Right.
We had talked before, again, this event about the audience you're going to be speaking to today, a bunch of journalism students who are facing maybe not the same struggles that Ed did, but their own struggles, whether it's personal, financial, disabilities. So what was Ed's message to young people? How would you recommend that everyone here who's, we're right now in the middle of midterm seasons at William Paterson, and people are stressed out about a lot of assignments and exams and all of that. So what would be the message that you would deliver that would reflect Ed's view on these things?
I think Ed's message would be to follow your dreams, never give up, work hard, do your research, but you have to have a passion for what you're doing. Ed had a passion for baseball, and he knew that he had to tie it in somehow. So the obvious way was to doing it through communications. He majored in communications at Seton Hall University. Ed was a pioneer at their radio station, WSOU. And at age 18, he had his own show, and it was called Around the Bases with Ed Lucas. And he was able to interview the star players of that day. Remember, New York had 3 teams. Well, 4 if you want to count the Mets, when they came in 62. But Ed was able to interview Yankee players, Dodger players, Giant players. But his message was just follow your dreams and your passion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have some photos of them back there with Jorge Posada. And it seemed like these relationships sustained him. So, and I want to give an opportunity for people in the audience. I'm going to throw it to you in a second, and also the people who are watching on YouTube as we go through some of the photos we have there. Reggie Jackson showing Ed how to swing the bat, and that's a really fun shot as well. Did Ed have mentors? What was his support system like? Because obviously he was doing this before you met, and I'm sure you formed a good support system, but did he have people he looked up to or was inspired by to help him get through all of this?
Well, Ed's parents believed in education, and they really encouraged him, and they were people of faith, and they believed that their faith and family would help overcome all obstacles. When Ed first became blind, he went to St. Joseph's School for the Blind, which is located in Jersey City. And at that point, back in 1952, it was run by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. Well, they installed independence in him. And there was one nun in particular that Ed cherished for, I'm going to say, about 40 years after the fact, after he became an adult, after he had been married, raised his children, gone through a divorce. Her name was Sister Anthony Marie. And the first day Ed met Sister Anthony Marie, and Ed said she was probably about 5 feet tall, dressed in the nurse's habit because that's what they wore that day. And Ed was walking in the corridor with his hands out like this, and she came by and knocked his hands down. And she says, "Eddie Lucas, what are you doing?" And he said to her, "Sister, I can't see where I'm going. I'm blind." And she said to him, "Isn't that a shame? We're all in the same boat here. So pick up your oar and start rowing." So that was Ed's first experience in terms of knowing that you've got to become independent and do this on your own. There was another incident where there was a blizzard, and it was a residential school, and Ed was going home for the weekend. His father came to pick him up, and there was a blizzard outside. So Mr. Lucas was helping Ed put on his snow boots. And Sister Anthony Marie came off the elevator, and she saw Mr. Lucas pushing Ed's foot in and Ed pushing, and she came up to him. "Oh, hello, Mr. Lucas," gave him an elbow like this and pushed him away. And she said, "Oh, sister, I'm helping Ed with his boots." And she looked at him, Ed's dad, and she says, "Mr. Lucas, he's only blind. He's not handicapped. And when he puts the boots on by himself, you can leave." And an hour and a half later, they left.
And so that's very tough love, I guess,
Tough
approach.
love. That's exactly what it was. Tough love.
But it sounds like it inspired him to realize he's being treated as everybody else in these spaces.
Exactly.
So I want to make sure I give it a chance for all of you who've been waiting patiently. So this is your chance. Do we have anyone from the audience? I can always repeat the question so that it can be heard by our audience that's watching on live stream. I'm monitoring the live stream, by the way, for anybody who's watching there, so I can get to those questions. But all right, I've given you a lot of time. Who has the first question that you'd like to ask Mrs. Lucas? Yeah, Cole?
So I'm sure Ed's heard a lot of broadcasts over the years. I'm interested to hear, who is his favorite, or what two was his favorite crew to listen to?
Ed enjoyed Mel Allen, Red Barber, Vince Scully. He was very close to Mel Allen, and of course, Scooter. Scooter was a broadcaster for the Yankees, I believe, from 1956 until he retired in 1996. So Phil broadcasted Yankee games for 40 years.
Yeah.
He also appreciated a lot of the outer town broadcasters, like for Joe Buck, and then it was Joe Buck's son.
Well, Jack Buck and then Joe Buck, his son.
I'm sorry, Jack and then Joe. Mm-hmm. Yes. Tim McCarver was a very, very good color commentator. Harry Carey. Those are some of the Hall of Famers.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting he's keeping abreast of all of the sports broadcasting from across the country, because
Yes.
Harry Carey in Chicago,
Yes.
Jack Buck, Joe Buck, St. Louis, Vin Scully obviously started in New York, but then he goes out to the Dodgers in Los Angeles.
Right.
So you have him still in an age when it wasn't as easy maybe to follow what was happening. Now we can follow it on social media and podcasts and stuff, but he was still listening, and I guess when they would visit in New York, he would listen to their broadcasts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a great message for everyone to keep consuming media and paying attention to the full scope of it. I know we had a question here before from Rochelle Estrada, who's the president of our Society of Professional Journalists chapter. So Rochelle.
Hi, Allison. It's really
Hi.
great to be able to meet you, and thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And I was seeing from the documentary that
Ed's passion for baseball is really present to the point that he dedicated his entire career to be able to attend baseball games, to be able to do interviews with different baseball players. And I was curious because I know that in the field of journalism, it requires a lot of your time and commitment to be able to work within the profession as a reporter. So I wanted to be able to ask you, how did Ed's commitment to journalism, how did it impact your relationship? Was it affected by the work that he did in this field in any way?
Well, when we first met, when we first met again, you know, we had that commonality bond, baseball. It was his love, it was my love, and then I used to like help Ed with some of his research. Again, Ed was not really privy to social media. I mean, Ed could barely manage a flip phone. He was more old school, as I said, transistor radio, etc. So I did some of his research for him. I used to read him baseball articles that would appear in different newspapers throughout the country. I used to get them off the computer, etc. So that's the way that, you know, I used to help him with it in that respect.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as we will pause the question for a second, I do want to hear more from you. I just was wondering, after Rochelle's question, what was Ed's process? Because you mentioned that he had the transistor radio. So was he taking notes? Was he reading Braille, like scorecards? Or how was he operating?
Okay, so Ed would be in the press box, and next to him would be his sighted guide. Ed had the transistor. He would be following the game with the transistor radio. The guide would fill in whatever need be here or there. After the game, Ed would go down into the clubhouse and interview the players. So he would have his tape recorder with him. And then they used to go back up into the press area. And to begin with, Ed used to phone the stories in to the newspaper or to the radio station, and then there would be somebody on the other end of the phone writing down notes or typing it in.
Okay, it's interesting. So he was relying on some other folks who were able to, make it all. And then a lot of his work. So we talked that he was a stringer. What were some of the outlets that he would have been working for over the years? Then?
Okay, well, Ed worked for WOBM. That's a radio station down in Toms River, New Jersey. I know that they're still on the air now. He had a weekly column up to several years ago with the Jersey Journal, and this ran during the baseball season and after the baseball season, and his column was called As I See It by Ed Lucas. He also had a baseball column in the Hudson Reporter. He also wrote for Baseball Digest magazine, did feature stories with Baseball Digest magazine, baseball collectibles, etc.
Oh, so full scope and also a multimedia presence of
Yes.
different places. All right. Any other questions that any of you have for Mrs. Lucas? Yes, Jim.
Allison, you mentioned earlier that Ed thought it was important to develop trust with the interviewee. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that? I mean, I'm assuming you're thinking things like you don't want to catch the person off guard, you don't want to surprise them. Is that what you're alluding to by trust?
Well, you mean when Ed was interviewing a player?
Yeah, I think you mentioned something they trusted him. So,
Okay.
like, what does that exactly mean?
Okay. Well, as I said, he developed a relationship with the players. There were a lot of things that they told him in confidence, some personal things, off the record, that Ed never divulged. But in terms of a trust, I think the most important thing that Ed felt in terms of conducting an interview, yes, he went in with a series of set questions that he was prepared to ask, but he felt the most important thing that the interviewer could use was his ears. And basically, listen to what they're saying. Don't think of your question, what you want to ask next, but listen to what they're telling you, because that can put you on a totally different path. And he felt that that was most important, that you listen and focus to what they're saying.
Some techniques there that we could all benefit from. I know that when I've talked to my students about interviewing, that there's this line in one of the textbooks I use that says, focus on the here and now. Like what you're hearing, instead of looking at your notes, you're so intent on, I've got to ask the next question, that you just say like, oh yeah, Ed and I met on Mars. And I'm like, okay, next question.
Right.
And I don't like pick up on that. Like, wait a second. And so that's an important aspect of interviewing for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, or any conversation that we're having. So any other questions right now? Oh, yeah, Tommy?
As you mentioned before, Ed, he experienced a lot of discrimination because of his disability. How do you feel he dealt with that? And what advice do you feel that he would have for people with a disability?
In the very beginning, to be honest with you, Ed was a little discouraged. He went to Phil Rizzuto and said, Scooter, I can't do this. They're all talking behind me. They're all talking behind my back. I hear what they're saying. And Phil said to him, Ed, you can do this. Don't listen to those naysayers. Casey Stengel, who was a great Yankee manager and a Baseball Hall of Famer, told me that I would never amount to anything in baseball. He said to me, hey boy, go get yourself a shoe shine box, because that's all you're going to amount to in life. Well, I showed him now, didn't I, Ed? So Phil was the one who really encouraged him, told him never to give up, and I think that's what was always in the back of his mind. Never give up. If you want this, you can do this. And in terms of Ed's disability, yes, Ed realized that he had a quote-unquote inconvenience, and I realized that I have an inconvenience, but Ed always used to say that it may take us a little bit longer to get things done, but we get it done.
Yeah, it's a wonderful way of powering through those sorts of issues. I want to talk to you about the Ed Lucas Foundation.
Sure.
So we heard a little bit in the documentary about the work that you all do with Seeing Eye Dogs and helping people with visual impairments. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Ed Lucas Foundation began and the work that you're doing?
Sure. Actually, Ed and I founded the Ed Lucas Foundation in 2012 because Ed always felt that he wanted to give back to others, that he felt that were less fortunate than he. Even though Ed was blind, he felt that he was still fortunate to have the career and to have the life that he had. Ed's baseball career often branched off into other areas. Ed was very fortunate to have interviewed and met 4 different U.S. presidents. So he was very lucky in that respect, and he cherished that. So he always felt that I'd like to give back. So we founded the Ed Lucas Foundation in 2012, and what we do is we support the blind, visually impaired, and special needs communities. And some of the site charities and other charities that we support are the Seeing Eye, which is located in Morristown, New Jersey. Ed had 4 Seeing Eye dogs. We support JDRF, which is juvenile diabetes, and diabetes is the #1 cause of blindness in the world. We support the Independence Fund, which in which we help provide track chairs to profoundly wounded veterans, those who have lost their limbs, something along that lines. We support Hudson County cerebral palsy. We also have an endowed scholarship called the Ed and Allison Lucas Fund at Seton Hall University, which is strictly for disabled students attending Seton Hall, and that provides adaptive equipment, financial support, whatever they need. So we're very, very proud of that. We've also support another little charity that we just picked up last year. It's called the Shining Stars Network, and it helps the special needs community students who want to develop their love for the dramatic arts.
I'm struck by the fact that today this event was inspired because Andrew had said that he wanted to introduce us and have this event, and Andrew just talked about his personal story and how that has influenced him. Did Ed have any proteges? Did he like interacting with young people who are maybe experiencing some challenge and inspire them?
Yes, actually, Ed and I had gone to the Seeing Eye on numerous occasions, and there were several young people there, college people, that had recently lost their sight, and they had wanted to go into the field of journalism, and Ed was able to help them after they completed their courses at the Seeing Eye in terms of getting into the communications field.
That's wonderful. That's really beautiful that he was still, paying it forward and doing all of that. I have one more question, then we'll go back to any final questions we have from the audience here. I think Rochelle was also asking a little bit before about the kind of work-life balance. So I'm wondering, a lot of spouses, partners of journalists talk about, he's on the road all the time. The baseball season starts, and all of a sudden his time is completely taken up by covering. It's a very demanding sport to cover, very demanding lifestyle. So what was that like? We've seen a lot about Ed's life on the field in the press box, but a lot of young people often ask me about, this is a demanding profession, 24/7, go, go, go. How do I make time for myself and my mental health and my family? And so what was that balance like in Ed's life?
Well, Ed was always a family man. Before Ed and I met, Ed had been married previously, and unfortunately that relationship did not go well. I don't think, and I don't think she really understood how to deal how to deal with Ed's inconvenience. And she hated baseball. So right then and there, she had 2 strikes against her. I mean, I think we've always had that common bond. We've always had that joy. I mean, there were many times when the phone would ring, I used to pick it up. Hi, Allison, it's Nolan Ryan. Can I talk to Ed? I used to get, and I still get quite a few calls because a lot of Ed's, friends became my friends. I mean, sure. David Cohn and I are very close because our major fundraiser for our Ed Lucas Foundation is the David Cohn Celebrity Golf Classic, and David Cohn is the honorary chair. David is very close, and also other members of the Yankee family, Bernie Williams. They've just continued to reach out to me in any way that they can help.
And were there organizations that were important to Ed? Because we're here for the Society of Professional Journalists chapter at William Paterson. I know that there's so many other organizations. We're partnering today with the National Center for Disability and Journalism at Arizona State. There's NABJ for Black journalists, NAHJ for Hispanic journalists. There's ones for Asian journalists, LGBTQ, and all of that. So was there any organizations that were also important to Ed, like in the journalism community?
Well, Ed was a member of the Irish American Baseball Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And Ed was actually inducted into 3 other Hall of Fames. In fact, Ed and I have been inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. So we are actually in there because of our historic groundbreaking wedding at Yankee Stadium. But yes, Ed was involved in several journalistic societies.
I ask that for a lot of our guests because I always want to know, like, what's the role that these organizations can play in all of your lives. And that sometimes when you're going through school, there's a lot of other demands on you, and you're thinking, I just got to get through classes. Don't tell me about joining SBJ. I can barely get through classes and work.
Well,
But yeah.
one of the things, too, Doctor, is that at age 18, Ed became a member of the Lions Club. And the Lions Club is the largest service organization in the world. And the Lions Club, what they do is they service the blind, visually impaired. And so that meant a lot to Ed. And Ed actually won their highest award, called the Melvin Jones Award, for his dedication to Lionism.
Well, and I think clubs like the Lions, any sort of fraternal organization, the Kiwanis and all these different groups, I think it's important for all of you to find your people because we're all going to need times where we need support. And of course, your friends, your classmates, that's part of it, your family. But there may be people, who they may not always get what you're going through because they're not in the same profession. They may not face all the same challenges that you did. So I think that having organizations like SBJ, one of the reasons why I started the chapter here and try to run all these events, and we go on newsroom tours, and Andrew was talking about, we just were at CBS, we're going to be at the Philadelphia Inquirer, is the opportunity for you to all meet folks on similar paths or who were once in that path years ago, and then say, this now could be my mentor. This is someone I can network with. And then, down the road, if I'm looking for a job or I'm facing a difficult day in the newsroom and I'm questioning, do I continue in my career? And people have those moments. I had that as a reporter. And so there are people that you can turn to and say, can I get a little bit of insight there? So yeah, I want to give final opportunities for questions from the audience that any of you have. Yeah, Mike.
So as we move on within decades from the 1950s and on, where technology has advanced to the point where it can be helpful for people with disabilities or anything like that, has there been anything that's like so huge that within Ed's career that was really just that pushing point for him that really helped him out with his journalism and everything?
Well, as I said, Ed was not computer savvy. I mean. What he did was he graduated from that big Pentron tape recorder. He gradually got a smaller cassette recorder, something that he was able to put in his pocket. And the last thing that he had was it was a little digital computer or a little a real small one. So he was able to use that, but. Ed would not have known, how to work an iPad or anything like that. There is a computer system out now, which the blind, visually impaired use. It's called the JAWS system, but even I can't work it because you have to be totally blind in order to use it. But I do work with a computer which is highly magnified to 800 times normal magnification. What you see on your desktop computer, I have to magnify that 800 times up, so I may see maybe an eighth of your page. So as I said before, it takes me a while, and I'm there with the mouse trying to find, what you see immediately in one shot. I've got to move it around, but it gets done.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see some of these advances in technology that will help the next generation of journalists and other people who are facing these challenges. But I think that grounds the core of support, the network, the support system that he had, I think is key. And then just it seemed like he had his own sense of what I'm doing is important. It's a mission of a journalist, right? It's important to get the news out there, and from my perspective.
And as Ed's career spanned, and his career spanned 65 years, he became somewhat of a legend. So much so that, we were hoping at the time of his death. I mean, it's still in the process now that, there may be a major motion picture about Ed's career. So I'm hoping, that if it's meant to be, it's meant to be, because I firmly believe that a story like this needs to be told to the masses.
And to that point, so as we start to wrap up, we want to have a final segment where we're going to need a prop for this.
Yes.
So I'm going to help out with this prop if I may.
Sure.
Because Allison brought something very important here today to show all of you that I had promised you. And so I'm going to, may I gently remove this from the box?
And you could explain to them what it is.
Well, so look at what we now have here with us today, which I think mentioned to you before. And so I'm going to read this on the bottom. It's presented to Ed. 2007 to 2008 New York Emmy Awards. I've never held an Emmy before. Outstanding Advanced Media Program in Sports from the YesNetwork.com. Ed Lucas Talent. April 1st, 2008. And then again it says YesNetwork.com. And so as I'll very delicately put this here, because I don't trust myself with such a treasured object. So can you tell us a little bit about this? Why did you bring this here today?
Well, I brought it because Ed was very proud of this interview that he did. It was an interview that he did with Jim Abbott. And for those of you who do not know Jim Abbott was a pitcher who pitched for the California Angels back in the mid-'80s, early '90s, a very successful pitcher. But the interesting thing about Jim Abbott is that he was born with a birth defect. He only had one hand. And he was a major league pitcher. So Jim used to have his glove on the stub of his arm, and then he used to throw with his right hand. But Jim also is a very, very inspirational, motivating individual. And they talked about overcoming adversity. Mm-hmm. And it was a wonderful, wonderful interview.
So winning this award, what did that mean to Ed? Because we were talking about all the challenges that he faced, and I know you were saying, you wanted this to be inspiring to the folks here who might be told, like Phil Rizzuto was by Casey Stengel, you're not good enough, go shine someone's shoes or find some other career. But he got the highest award that you could get in his field. So what did that mean to him?
Well, what it meant to him was, again, as you said, the highest achievement that you could possibly win, and it was done through his dedication to journalism, to communications, to never giving up, to just striving to be the best journalist that you possibly can be. Know your subject when you go in to interview somebody. Be passionate. Reach all your goals, or try to reach all your goals, and then that could possibly be yours.
Yeah, isn't that something?
It's a wonderful. It's funny, because in the very beginning, his colleagues did not recognize him, and then it's funny how things come full circle, that he was voted upon that by his colleagues.
It's incredible to think about everything we've just gone over today, of from the beginning of not being accepted, facing those sorts of challenges, to then having the lifelong friendships that we were cycling through some of those photographs of the different players. And you've talked about some of the sports writers, like you mentioned, Bill Madden at the New York Daily News, who we saw in the documentary, who you said was a former colleague of mine when I was a reporter there. You said was very kind to Ed. And then getting all these sorts of accolades, being in the Hall of Fame, and then finding you was partially through baseball, right? Your love of the game and connecting over that. So although there was this moment, and I think that you'll all face this, we all do at points in life, right, where something happens and we wonder, how can we possibly recover? How can we compensate for what we think, we imagine we've lost, right? And Ed faced that. But then with help from a community, different people throughout his life, and just this spirit of like, what I'm doing is important, I can do it. No one's going to tell me I'm not fit for this job. and now we sit here, and this is gleaming light from the studio.
Exactly.
And so I think that's incredible. So I think that's probably a good place for us to leave our discussion today. And certainly for all of you who are here, I hope you'll take an opportunity to come up and thank Mrs. Lucas for being here today. And if you have any questions, I hope you'll have a little bit of time to hang out with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much. And let's thank her,
Quite
please,
welcome.
for coming. So thanks to all of you. As you know from Andrew talking earlier, the Society of Professional Journalists, we will have some events coming up this week. Our campus chapter on Friday, we're going to go on a trip to Philadelphia this Friday, October 27th. So we're going to go first to WHYY Radio, where the current president of the New Jersey chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists, Kenneth Burns, works. So he's getting us in there. Another thing about having connections through an organization. And then later on that day, we're going to go to the Philadelphia Inquirer and tour their newsroom. And we're going through a lot of these sorts of events in the next several months, so the semester, the whole academic year. So make sure you follow us at WPSPJ, like Andrew said. We're on Twitter/X and Instagram. We're on Facebook for any of you who still use Facebook too. But thank you all for coming out here, and I hope you have a great rest of your days. All right, take care. Thank you.